A yellow star burns in the viewport as Hadrian's Folly lists through space. Lucius Tarquin stares at the empty fuel indicator on his control panel, waiting for Adalee to speak. At last she says, "How is that possible?" He says, "It must have been a small asteroid or meteor impact. We're actually lucky the whole ship didn't explode." Adalee says, "I suppose that's true. But what now?" "I'm gonna have to go outside and fix it. Then we'll have to find some more fuel." "What about that?" she asks, pointing to the star in the distance. "Can that help?" "Assuming I can patch the hole and the fuel scoop isn't also damaged, then yes." "And what should I do?" Adalee asks, shifting somewhat uncomfortably in her seat. "You should wait here," he says, "and keep an eye out." "An eye out for what?" He grins. Pretty much anything at this point. Welcome back for episode 5 of Errant Adventures. As always, I'm your game master and solo player, Steve Morrison. This week, Lucius and Adalee contend with a lack of fuel and try to finish their expedition to Lodestar, but things are never quite that easy this far out in the Forge. Please enjoy episode 5, A Magical Connection. He climbs out of his pilot's seat and makes his way into the rear section of the Hadrian's Folly, where there's an airlock that he can use to access the exterior of the ship. And he starts to suit up in his environment suit and, puts his gear on, and he seals the helmet on his suit, steps into the airlock, it seals behind him, and then the airlock opens up and he is able to step out into the vacuum of space, and his grav boots solidify on the outer hull, and he starts making his way towards the section of the ship that received its damage. All right, let's go ahead and do our repairs. So when you make repairs to your vehicle, envision the situation and roll. Making your own repairs, roll plus wits. So I am going to go ahead and roll plus 3 wits. So that's good. And let's see how good this is. Okay, well that's that's an amazing first roll of the session. So I have a 4 on the action die, which seems scary, but I've got 2 1s on the challenge dice. So I've got a strong hit and an opportunity, which is amazing. So for the repair in the field, strong hit is 4 repair points. And I think because this isn't actually necessarily a direct damage to the ship, like a mechanical damage to the ship, I don't have the battered condition for the vehicle or anything like that. I think 4 points is going to be enough to repair this hole. And I think the opportunity is that the ship can refuel from the star. I think that makes sense. So after Lucius finishes up patching the hull, he returns back inside and is going to go ahead and divest himself of the environment suit, go back into the cockpit. Adalee says, "That was quick work out there." And Lucius says, "Well, thank you. I've learned a thing or two around ships." And I think, he smiles a little bit, remembering some moment from his youth, because his family is kind of the family of shipbuilders, the founder clan revolving around shipbuilding, that he remembers some moment where he learned some bit of ship lore or repair work from either one of his family members or like a close advisor or something like that. And he says, I was raised around ships, and it really was a pretty simple repair. Just unfortunate that it happened. But again, we were fortunate that it didn't explode. So I can only complain so much. And let's see if we can't get some fuel from that star. And they start to fly in that direction. Now, I was thinking that this might be a resupply because we're getting like supplies back, but it doesn't feel quite right. Just because this is, again, it's not necessarily, this is a mechanical, and when I say mechanical, I don't mean in the ship mechanical way, but the game system that I'm using mechanical way. Like my supply is at 3, like it's pretty solid supply for what it is. This damage to the ship's fuel system was a result of a bad roll. So I think it's going to be more of a face danger to essentially pilot the ship close enough and be able to gain enough fuel from the star without some complication coming up. So I think this is going to be wits again, because I don't think it's necessarily has to be speed or endurance or anything like that. The ship is designed to do this, so it's expertise here. Okay, so I got a 7 on the action die. I've got an 8 and a 2 on the challenge dice, so we've got a weak hit. So we succeed, but at a troublesome cost. Make a suffer move, -1. And I think, now this is interesting, because I think at this point, it almost makes sense to me to make the suffer move be a loss of supply, because I get some fuel reserves back, but there's not as many as I would like. And so I end up sitting at 2 supply instead of 3 supply. So I think that's what I'm going to go with. Lucius pilots the Hadrian's Folly in close enough to the star that he's able to scoop up some of the heat and the radiation and whatever it is that they use for fuel in this universe. He's able to scoop up some of that and is able to replenish their supplies enough that they can continue the journey to Lodestar. Now, I have 7 ticks on my progress track to Lodestar. 7 out of 10 is pretty good, and I'm tempted right now to go ahead and try to reach my destination. Because I'm in my thinking, we've come a long way, and if we jump right now and our next kind of destination, the next leg of this journey, is in the proximity of Lodestar, then if I get a strong hit, that's great. If I get a weak hit, there's some interesting possibilities there. And if I get a miss, I've got enough like built up possibilities that I'm sure we can find something interesting that will terribly, terribly go wrong. So as Lucius keys in the next leg of the journey, he engages the E-Drive and the Hadrian's Folly jumps out of this system. I'm going to go ahead and try to finish an expedition. So when the expedition comes to an end, roll the challenge dice and compare to your progress. So I've got 7 progress. Here we go. All right, I've got a 6 and a 1 on the challenge dice, and that gives me a strong hit. Whew, a little bit of a sigh of relief there, because I was fully expecting that to go horribly, horribly awry. So on a strong hit, you reach your destination. Mark a reward on your Discovery Legacies track per expedition's rank. So this was a formidable. So I get to mark a full box on my Discovery's Legacy track, which is super cool because that nets me 2 XP, which is amazing. It's the first XP I've earned in this campaign so far. And I'm sure there are some things that I'd like to, some of my assets that I'd like to upgrade. So we finished the expedition. I'm also going to say that I'm going to mark a tick of progress on my current vow, which is provide safe passage for Adalee, as well as take a message to Nashana Aerith, clan leader of Lodestar. And so I'm at 2 out of 10 progress on that, because it is also a formidable vow. So even though we have arrived at Lodestar, there's still a lot of work that needs to be done before we can go ahead and complete that vow. The things that we know about Lodestar is that it is this deep space gathering of individuals who are possibly outcasts from other clans. There's some sort of desire for a sixth clan or a clan of outcasts bonding together. We know the population is hundreds. We know their authority is oppressive, which I'm envisioning as being a very militaristic system as opposed to necessarily being tyrannical. So I'm envisioning Nashana Aerith as being more of like a warlord rather than like a dictator or something like that. Mostly because their projects are warfare and festival. Now the festival I think is interesting because I don't know exactly what that means at the moment, but I'm sure we'll find out as we make our way through Lodestar. So I am going to jump over and roll on our cosmic matter table because I want to see what section of deep space that they are in. So I'm going to go ahead and roll 25, another asteroid field. So I feel like there are lots of asteroids out here. Makes sense. And it is I rolled a 74, so it's a dense field of asteroids. I think that kind of makes sense. And these asteroids are made of 56 organic matter. Interesting. The Hadrian's Folly jumps out of E drive, and we see this massive field of asteroids. There's probably a plume of organic life signatures that show up on Lucius' sensors, and he just kind of like leans forward and stares out the viewport and says, wow, it's beautiful. And like maybe there's like multicolored lights sort of like dancing around, and he looks over at Adalee and says, have you ever seen it before? And she says, no, I haven't. But you're right, it is quite lovely. And as they're watching this scene unfold in front of them, the scanners pick up one ship, and then two ships, and then 5 ships, and so on and so forth. And we see this fleet of ships just rising up over the spread field of these asteroids. And Lucius says, well, I'm going to guess that's Lodestar. Should I just hail them? Or that's probably a good idea. And Adalee says, you haven't really done this much before, have you? Lucius kind of blushes a little bit and looks at her and says, well, I'm a newly minted herald, but that doesn't mean that I can't do the job. And he calls up the comm system and reaches out to them. And I think he says, Lodestar, my name is Lucius Tarquin. I'm a herald. I have a message to deliver to clan leader Aerith. Please advise. Now, because I have a bunch of ticks left on my vow, I'm guessing that it's not going to be super easy to just bring this message to Aerith. But I don't know why it's not going to be easy. I have an idea in my head, but I want to ask the Oracle about this. So I think my question is for the Oracle, does a ship or ships of the Iron Hawks show up at this moment to interrupt the docking with Lodestar? I think it is likely just because they have been dogging the steps of both Lucius as well as Adalee. And it makes sense to me that there are other ships out there who are hunting for Lodestar. And I think this is the important thing to note is, for some reason, we don't know what it is yet, but for some reason, the Iron Hawks are on the lookout and on the hunt for Lodestar. And I just had the thought that maybe Nashana Aerith is a former Idabren. Like maybe she is also in exile, much like Lucius, much like Aurelia. And Clan Idabren, the Ironhawks, do not want her to basically rise up against them. Could be. That's probably another question for the Oracle. For right now, I think it is likely that a ship or ships from Clan Idebren show up at this moment to interrupt the meeting of Lucius Tarquin and Nashana Aerith. So 26 or greater, the answer is yes. 94. It's a pretty definitive yes. All right, so the question I next have is how many ships show up? And I think that there is a fleet of ships. Well, let's ask the Oracle that. I'm going to say it's 50-50 on whether or not it's one ship or a fleet of ships. So I'm going to say, is it one ship? 50-50? 26. So no. So we've so far come across a dreadnought, a cruiser, and we don't know if there are other ships out there. So let's ask the Oracle on that. Are there more ships than just the dreadnought and cruiser out there? Again, I'm going to say it's 50-50. 19. Okay. No, there are not more ships than just those two. All right. So Lucius transmits this message, and just before he receives a response, 2 more ships drop out of E-Drive. I would say not necessarily close to the Hadrian's Folly, but like somewhere between the Folly and the Lodestar fleet. And it is that dreadnought and the cruiser. And Adalee sort of inhales a breath and says, "Oh no, they've found me." And Lucius looks at her and looks at the ships and says, "They found us. And what's more, Lodestar. I really hope they don't think we led them here." And as he says that, the Lodestar ships, I think, start to break formation. And I definitely think that they do not have the firepower to go toe-to-toe with like top-of-the-line ships from Clan Idebren. I'm envisioning Lodestar as something akin to like a pirate fleet, where they have weapons, they have ships, but they're maybe a little bit more ragtag than you might expect given their sort of mysterious reputation. So the fleet of Lodestar starts to break off and head in different directions, and Lucius receives no comm back, I think, because there's no time. And I think that the dreadnought and the cruiser practically ignore the Hadrian's Folly and start heading off in the direction of the fleet. And there's probably a couple ships that are like staying behind, because I think the Lodestar fleet isn't just battleships. I think there are, the more that I talk about it, I'm getting this very sort of Battlestar Galactica, like there's maybe a couple of more prominent battleships in there, older models, of course. And then there is a fleet of sort of civilian ships, some of which have probably been outfitted with weapons, but they are not a potent enough fighting force. And this ties back to the shipbuilder, because maybe the reason that Aurelia is out there is because she was supplying these people with either schematics or something like that before and got exiled, and is now continuing that work, albeit from exile, and is actually going through the process of building ships for them. I think that's a cool idea. That kind of ties them together a little bit more. And, Lucius may or may not find that to be an acceptable thing to get involved with. So Lucius, I think, looks at this and says, well, we have to get to that fleet. If they're going to jump away from here, like, we have to be with them, because otherwise we're going to lose our opportunity to communicate with them. And Adalee says, I agree. Those asteroids are going to provide some cover. It looks like some of their fleet is heading in that direction, but those others are not. And Lucius says, yeah, I would wager that clan leader Aerith is on one of those ships. And if we can get close enough, maybe we can get the attention of somebody who's not focused on the battle, and we can land before they leave. So Lucius pushes the ship forward and is trying to race forward towards the fleet before this battle engages. And I think the cruiser and the dreadnought at least launches some fighters that are heading off in the direction, and Lodestar probably also launches some fighters as well. As Lucius and Adalee approach the fight, Adalee says, "How is your combat piloting?" And Lucius says, "I have had a lot of practice flying, but, well, how is your gunnery?" And she says, "It'll be enough." And he's like, "All right, well, here goes nothing." And they scream into the now pitched battle that is going on between this dreadnought and cruiser and several of these battleships from Lodestar. And I think it is fitting to do a battle right now, to do a battle move. And so when you fight a battle and it happens in a blur, envision your objective and roll. If you so this is definitely going to be if you fight at range or using your speed and the environment to your advantage, roll plus edge. I think that's what it's going to be. So I think the fighting actually is taking place in and amongst these asteroids. So the asteroids are made up of organic material. And I think maybe there's some sort of like fungal spore plumes that are coming out as these asteroids are getting hit with various weapons fire, stray weapons fire. And Hadrian's Folly comes screaming in and is like ducking and weaving and is trying to pick off some of the Ironhawk fighters to give cover to Lodestar's fleet. So we're going to do speed, and he's like weaving in and out and around the asteroids. And Adalee is trying to like fire the guns, which are probably fairly minimal. Like it's not an unarmed ship, but he doesn't have like heavy cannons or anything like that on board. So we're going to go ahead and roll battle to cover this entire combat in one go. So hopefully we roll well. Just for the record, my momentum is at 4, so there is a good possibility that this could go very poorly. So here we go. Okay, so I rolled a 3 on the action die. I've got a 3 and a 9 on the challenge dice, which is a miss, which is pretty bad. However, I have 4 momentum, like I just said. So I'm going to burn that momentum to at least turn this battle to a weak hit. So I'm going to reset my momentum back to 2. And then looking at the battle move, a weak hit, I achieve my objective, but not without cost. So pay the price. And this is something that I haven't done a whole lot of. Oftentimes I already have some sort of consequence in mind when I, would normally pay the price. But I like the idea of seeing what the Oracle says on this. So I'm going to roll for it. 59. A friend, companion, or ally is in harm's way. Oh boy. Okay, so I think this is how the scene plays out. They are weaving in and out, fighting off fighters. Adalee guns down a couple of them, and Lucius is fairly sort of taken aback by that, and is impressed with her gunnery ability. But it's not enough, and it's clear that like a couple of the Lodestar ships are starting to list a little bit. They're retreating. They're in the process of retreating, essentially. And Adalee turns to Lucius and says, "I think I know a way to help this battle, but you're going to have to trust me." And Lucius says, "Anything you want, anything you need, I can do it." And he like is flying the ship and, like doing a spin around an asteroid as they're being chased by a fighter. And Adalee says, "Get me in close to one of those asteroids." He's like, "Okay." And brings the ship kind of screaming around this asteroid and like as close as possible to skimming the surface. And he's distracted for like a split second as Adalee starts chanting something. And he kind of like looks over and she has her hands extended out towards the view screen. And she's chanting these words that he doesn't recognize, he doesn't understand, which is a little bit strange for him. And she kind of finishes this chant, and her hands, which have been extended out, palm forwards towards the view screen, she rotates her hands so that they are palm up and just like raises her palms to the sky. And the spores on all of these asteroids simultaneously plume out into space. They cover the fighters, they cover the cruiser and the dreadnought, and the Lodestar ships take the opportunity to maneuver away from the Ironhawk ships. And Lucius says, "Oh, wow, that is amazing." And he looks over, and Adalee has slumped over and is like twitching in her chair. And Lucius looks over and curses and maneuvers the ship around. And as he does so, there's a comm that comes through from one of the Lodestar ships that says, "Herald, we're about to jump. Follow us." And there's a like quick burst of navigational data that comes across. Lucius types it in real quick. The fleet, the Lodestar fleet, one by one, jump off into E-Drive. And as the Idebren ships, the Ironhawks, are clearing away this mass of spores that's in between, Lucius takes one sort of look at them, finishes. The last Lodestar ship jumps out of the system, and he engages the E-Drive, and they leave the asteroids behind. While they're in E-Drive, Lucius quickly unbuckles his harness and scrambles out of the seat and goes over to Adalee and is like, Adalee, are you all right? Are you okay? And she's still like twitching a little bit. And there's maybe some like foam in her mouth, and he's just cursing and sweating. And he grabs her, pulls her out of her restraints, and carries her down to the med station and is going to try and treat her, whatever is happening to her. So he is providing care. So we're going to roll plus wits. So he lays her out on the bed. And this is all a little too familiar since it was only basically like yesterday that he met her and rescued her from this escape pod and brought her in here and was healing her. So he still has like the scans all across on the screens, and he's like trying to figure out what is going on. So we're going to roll plus wits. All right, I've got a 5 on the action die, and I've got a 1 and a 9 on the challenge dice. So we've got a weak hit. So it is helpful. So she is stabilized, but the recovery costs extra time or resources. So I could either lose 2 momentum, or I could sacrifice 2 resources. I am going to... This is a tough choice because I think... my momentum is at 2. So if I lose 2 momentum, I'm making myself fairly vulnerable to some bad rolls. However, I only have 2 supply left. And that's my other sort of thought, is that he uses whatever the last of his medical supplies are to help treat her. And he essentially taps out his ship's systems. And I think that's what I'm going to go with. He's going to mark it down to 0. And that means that our supplies are exhausted. So we have to mark unprepared, which is not great. So when you suffer a loss of resources while unprepared, envision how this causes you hardship and apply the cost to a different suffer move. So, could be pretty bad. But I think at the moment, Adalee is alive. She's unconscious and resting, but I think she is slowly sort of coming back to consciousness. So I think this represents another milestone in our quest to take the message to Nishana as well as provide safe passage for Adalee. So I'm going to mark another progress on my vow, which gets me 3 out of 10 progress. All right, so at this point, a couple hours later, the ship comes out of E-Drive, and the rest of the Lodestar fleet is there. As Lucius sort of drops out of E-Drive, he receives a communication from one of the Lodestar ships that basically says, all right, Herald, transmit your message and be done. And Lucius responds and says, I'm terribly sorry, but that's not how this works. I was tasked with delivering it by hand to clan leader Aerith. The voice comes back and says, well, that's just not going to happen, son. You see, you brought those Iron Hawks to our door, and we can't guarantee that they're not tracking you. So you need to get out of here as soon as you can. Lucius sort of thinks about that for a minute and says, there's very little possibility that they're tracking me, seeing as they arrived from a different vector than what I came from. And look, you understand how this works. I have to deliver this message by hand. Otherwise, my client will not be happy. And I think he's going to try and do a little compel to see if he can talk this person into allowing him to land. I'm actually going to try and secure an advantage first by basically, I think, using his position as a herald and the idea of iron vows, which this culture, I think, takes pretty seriously. He's trying to get across the idea that, look, I'm doing my job. You know that this is how messages are passed in our society. Help me out here. I'm going to go for wits again, because I think expertise, focus, or observation. I think he's trying to point out the fact that, like, I'm doing my job. This is what that requires. Don't get in my way. So I'm going to do plus wits, which is +3, and hope he can talk his way in. Okay, so I've got a 4 on the action die. I've got a 7 and a 10 on the challenge dice, so it's a miss. So I fail, or my assumptions betray me. Pay the price. I'm going to roll on the pay the price again. I already have an idea in mind, so I'm more looking for maybe confirmation or to see if something triggers a different idea. So that'll be 70. You waste resources. Yeah, see, that doesn't make sense to me. All right, so here's what happens. So he makes this plea, and the voice comes back and says, son, this is Lodestar. The things that you expect out of society are the things that we cannot stand for anymore. We are the broken. We have been spat on and cast out and forgotten. Why should we follow the expectations of a society that cast us out? If you won't transmit your message, be gone or be destroyed. And Lucius, well, this just keeps getting better and better. And so that was just the secure an advantage. So he's still going to try and do the compel. And we're going to do it with heart. So we're going to charm, pacify, encourage, or barter. And I think he's going to say, I have come with a message for clan leader Aerith from the shipbuilder of Rampart. You need the message that I have. And not only that, but I also have with me a potential new ally. Please allow us to board so that I can transmit this message. And he's going to try and roll plus heart. +2. All right, so I got a 6 on the action die. I've got a 1 and an 8 on the challenge dice. That is a weak hit. So as above, but their agreement comes with a condition or a complication. Envision their counteroffer. I think I'm going to roll on a little table. Action and theme, I think. So I got an 89. Strengthen. 73. Resource. Okay. All right. So I think they say, very well, we will allow you to board our ship, but not here. We have to make a few more jumps before we can allow you to board. We will transmit to you a rendezvous point. You must make 2 more jumps before coming to the rendezvous point, and you must wait at least 5 hours at each place to see if they show up. If you do not, we will view this as an act of belligerence. And they transmit a series of kind of like jump points. And he says, the voice says, it would also not hurt your cause if you were to use some of that time to gather resources that would help us. After all, if you did bring the Ironhawks to our door, then you would be well served to help us recover. And Lucius kind of rolls his eyes a little bit and is like, just another fetch quest to go on. But he settles his calm and says, I understand, and I accept your terms. I will do as you've asked, and we will see you at the rendezvous and he does a quick calculation, including the time spent there, 15 hours. Very well. After a little bit of time, because I think time in eDrive moves differently than sort of like quote unquote real time. So they probably, because they arrived a little bit before he did, their eDrives have charged a little bit faster. And so they jump out on a different trajectory. And Lucius turns and jumps off into to the first of the rendezvous points. And what does he find at that rendezvous? So the first spot, 62, is a planet. What sort of planet is it? 97. A tainted world. All right, so he jumps in. There's this tainted world below. Are there any resources of note on this tainted world? So we're going to ask the Oracle. I think it is unlikely, so 76 or greater is yes, there are resources. And it is 76, in fact. So yes, there are resources here. First of all, I'm going to mark another tick because he did successfully compel a meeting. So we're now at 4 progress, and we are now almost halfway through our progress track on our vow. The Hadrian's Folly is orbiting over this tainted world, and Lucius sees that there are some... what sort of resources might they want? You know what? This tainted world has like fungal plants or something like that. But I think what it actually has is the ability to... these fungi are actually the sort of thing that you could make medicines or something like that out of. So it's a tainted world, but through this particular process, you can basically turn these things, these mushrooms, into some sort of medicine. So he's going to have to like swoop down there and gather up some of this stuff and then go ahead and bring those back. So I'm going to, I think that because this is not, like, I'm not replenishing my own supplies, I'm trying to gather supplies that I'm basically going to then turn over to Lodestar. This isn't going to have anything to do with gathering supplies or resupplying or anything like that. I think it's literally just going to be I'll face danger to go down to this planet and like successfully get this stuff from there. And I think it's going to be expertise. He's just going to find the right mushrooms, and he's got some tools and stuff like that he can use to harvest them. And so we're just going to roll plus wits on this. All right, I got an 8 on the action die. I got a 6 and a 4 on the challenge dice for a nice strong hit. So he successfully gathers the resources that they require. He's going to get to tick a momentum up, which is nice, and gets them back onto the ship. Returns back into the atmosphere, waits the 5 hours, and then makes the jump to the next destination. I think somewhere in between there, whether it's while they're still orbiting this tainted world or after they make the jump to the second of the 3 destinations. Adalee comes up and joins him in the cockpit. And as they are sitting there, I think Lucius says, Adalee, are you okay? Did you do something with those spores? And she sort of like hugging herself and like tucked in to the chair. She nods a little bit and says, yes, I did. Well, I'm not sure how to describe it. And Lucius just kind of like looks across her and says, you're a paragon, aren't you? And she is silent for a moment. And then she says, yes, I am. The group that raised me, they taught me many things. And one of the things they taught me was how to connect with other living things and how to convince those living things to help me. And what I did in that asteroid field is the biggest manifestation of that I've ever been able to achieve. I don't know if I can do it again. And Lucius sort of listens and nods and says, I understand. I don't really understand, but I mean, what you did was amazing, and I think it may have saved our lives. So, thank you. And I think she shudders a little bit and looks at him and says, I don't think anyone's ever thanked me for my abilities before. And Lucius has a very sort of serious look on his face. And he says, I understand. I was also raised with a family that was very determined that I should follow certain paths and that I should live up to certain expectations. And they were not always the kindest. And I think Adalee nods and says, well, I'm glad that we at least have that in common. I think I'm going to go get some sleep. And Lucius smiles a little bit and says, that sounds like a good idea. I'm going to make the next jump and we'll be to Lodestar, and hopefully this time they'll actually let us land in just a few more hours. But I'll let you know. I'll wake you up when we get there. And she stands and walks towards the exit, the door to the cockpit, and then stops and pauses and like turns back towards Lucius. And I'm going to test the relationship right here. So when your relationship with connection is tested through conflict, betrayal, or circumstance, roll plus heart. So I've got a heart of 2. Oof. Okay. So I got a 6 on the action die. I've got a 5 and an 8 on the challenge dice. So I got a weak hit. So on a strong hit, the test is strengthened your relationship. If you share a bond, mark 1 tick on your bond's legacy. Otherwise, develop a relationship. On a weak hit, as above, but you must first prove your commitment. Envision what they demand of you, ask the oracle if unsure, and do it, or swear an iron vow to see it done. If you refuse or fail, see the miss result below. All right, so I think she stands there in the doorway and looks back at him, and she says, Lucius, I'm glad to have met you, but I need you to understand, my powers are not to be trifled with. They are not things of awe. They are things of terror. And if you tell anyone about what you've seen, I will have to kill you. And then she walks away. Thanks for listening to Errant Adventures. If you enjoyed the show, please tell your friends, family, pets, or really anybody you want about it. And head over to Apple Podcasts to leave a review so more people can find the show. If you want to chat with me, you can find me on Instagram and Twitter at errantsolopod, or you can email me at errantsolopod@gmail.com. Thanks again for listening, and I'll see you next time.